The young man walked peacefully during that dark night and with clouds that foreshadowed a storm. I should hurry, he thought, as he stood and stared straight into the sky, and then went on with his journey. The street was strangely empty and quiet that night, something this young man had noticed long ago and which, for some reason he did not understand, disturbed him and made him rush even more. Suddenly he heard a sound behind him, like a whistle or a whistle, which echoed in the air with a somber and shuddering echo and a tune that awoke to the madness and the darkest feelings that can come to dwell in the heart of a man, but who seemed not to belong to this plane of existence so earthly, for it was as if he came from the very beyond, and when he turned to look for the source of such strange and dismal noise, he saw only the street and the cars parked in the garages of the houses. It must be my imagination, he told himself to reassure his mind. I must be tired and so I hear these things, but the truth was that he did not believe one of the words he said. When he turned to walk, he seemed to see out of the corner of his eye and for just a few milliseconds, a dark presence, peering out from one of the trees that were there, but detracted from it, trying to convince himself that everything was a product of his imagination and his agitated mind, in vain. He began to walk in a hurried, almost running, with that sound behind him that seemed to be getting closer and closer. From time to time he would turn for a few seconds to look out of the blue, expecting to see at last that infernal whistle, and every time he saw the same from the corner of his eye, an ethereal figure peering out from behind something. The whistle began to increase its volume gradually, and now it did not come from behind him, but from all sides, from all possible angles. It was at this moment when the young man realized that everything that was happening around him was not a product of his imagination or his tired mind, but was actually happening. Everything had been true from the beginning and, at edge of madness, he began to run, as he had never done before. As he ran, he began to see that grim figure everywhere, on the roofs of houses, in cars, even on the tops of trees. The boy, already tired and utterly horrified, tripped over an overhanging piece of broken sidewalk, and fell to the floor in his hands. When he tried to get up, he looked up and there he was, that horrible, black, ethereal silhouette standing right in front of him, smiling and staring at him with eyes that resembled the same flames of hell. Convinced that the time had come for his untimely death, he closed his eyes and waited for the worst. He woke up startled and totally drenched in his own sweat. She looked around him and could only appreciate the tranquility of her room. Outside, there was a deafening, thunderous storm. Drops of water crashed against the windows of her room, and they seemed to be tears that glided over a glass face. It was just a dream, he thought, still somewhat altered by the recent nightmare. He got out of bed, walked to the bathroom and washed his face with tap water. Then under the stairs, accompanied by the sound of his own footsteps and the drops of water crashing on the roof. Then he listened again, that damn sound that seemed to come from the deepest circles of the earth. He stood there in the middle of the stairs, totally petrified with fear, his gaze lost in the void and his eyes totally bloodshot. His body began to produce a cold sweat down his face. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the room for only a few seconds and forced him to close his eyes. When he opened them, he could not believe what their eyes saw. The whole enclosure was full of those tiny and detestable creatures, who moved and piled on top of each other with a mad rhythm. When his legs finally decided to respond, he turned and went back up the stairs, and headed to the security of his room. When he arrived, he came in and closed the door behind him and leaned against it. He dropped down and buried his tear-stained face in his hands as that devilish sound rumbled in his head. The poor man could not stand it any more and he ran his hands to his ears and thrust his index fingers into them, reaching deep, tearing his eardrums, hoping to silence the whistling that tormented him, but it was in vain. Soon his body was found by the police, due to complaints from his neighbors about the smell that came from inside the house. A detective approached the body and told the policeman that he was there taking pictures. "What do we have here?" Young man of 26 years. His name was Marco Diadi. He suffered a general arrhythmia between 3:30 and 3:50 in the morning. General arrhythmia in a man of 26 years, said the detective in a tone of doubt. Yes. Apparently it was caused by a sudden panic attack. I get it. He also seems to have broken his eardrums with his own hands. What would lead someone to do something like that? Well, there's a pretty logical reason. Which? He was schizophrenic. We find your medications in the trash. At that moment the detective thought he heard a whistle, almost imperceptible, but still there. He did not think it important and he continued with his work.